Alright, so now for Helix, open up your slicer, start a new project. Your slicer has products. If you're using Orca or Bamboo Studio, then you should be able to just click and open the 3MF file. It should look something like this. On this first plate here, we have the buffer, which is just a TPU part, nice and simple. Doesn't really need any supports or anything like that. It is worth trying to dial in your settings on TPU a little bit, as this is a smoother part. It's theoretically a little bit better. I've used some that are pretty bumpy and not printing great, and they work just fine. So tuning can make it look better, but probably not too necessary. Then over here we have the secondary color parts. We have the grip, the bump block, the buffer tube, the spring guide for like Seagull or Harrier springs, and then the end piece. Almost all of these do need supports. The spring guide just needs a little bit at the end here. The end piece needs some at the bottom. These two sections in the top. And then a bit in the top here. Just helps to make sure it stays nice and round. It'll keep the quick disconnect lug there working just fine. The pump block just needs a little bit of support at the top there. When it comes to the buffer tube, needs a bunch of support on the bottom, but it's kind of designed to be printed this way just because it makes it a bit stronger. So ends up being worth it, but does need some support at the front and then a bunch on the back there. When it comes to the grip, given the shape of it, it needs a whole bunch of support on the bottom, as you can see. And then when it comes to the sides, there needs nice flat sections to keep the sections where the sidebars are going to go open. And I also recommend doing the top of the trigger well, or what ends up being the bottom of the trigger guard, top at the moment. Just keep that nice and flat. Now if we move over to the primary color parts, the grip insert here doesn't need any supports because it's pretty flat. Both of the braces are an odd part to print. I found this to be the best orientation. It does use a fair amount of support, but it seems to work out pretty well and give good results. When it comes to the magwell top, we have a bit of support on each of these areas, as you could probably guess. And I like to put a bit on the bottom here. If your printer's good at bridging, you might not need that, but I just like the extra peace of mind. And then the extra support painting up in here is just from filling in that one surface, and I don't think it's necessary. And when it comes to the other part, you just need a little bit at the front here. Again, if your printer is good at bridging, I don't think this is really an issue, but still good. And at the end of it, it's worth putting a bit of support on these panels just so the magwell top and the front section slide together nicely. But you can print it without that support there if you want to. When it comes over here to the orange bits, one thing worth calling out is the catch, which is probably worth printing with extra walls and infill, but it does have spots for screws that go through it, and I've been able to use these at 3 walls and 15% infill just fine. When it comes to things like the muzzle here, there's a fair bit of support on the bottom. When it comes to the plunger head as well, the plunger is printed in this orientation just for the most strength with how it's being loaded, as the other way can make layer adhesion issues really prominent. And it has a separate part for the front, so you don't have to worry too much about the tolerances in printing a circle off axis. Then each of the front rail section doesn't need support, but the rear one needs a fair amount because of its dovetail, and also to fit over the linear rail. Then we have the back end cap, just gets filled in. There's not really an ideal way to print this part, though you could print it the other way. I find that this just ends up looking better in a finished blaster, but the other way would use less support. Last thing we'd call out is all these. These are the barrel mounts. We have two 60mm ones and two 15. The shorter ones use a single O-ring, while the longer ones use two. So if you're worried about the barrel coming out, it might be worth using the longer ones, but the shorter ones I found will do just fine. So whichever ones you're using, you'll just want to make sure you have two of them. So if you're using a 15mm barrel, you'd want to duplicate the O-ring collet and then delete the other three originals. And yeah, but if you are planning on using one of my scars with it, then you'll want to print 3 collets, 2 for mounting the barrel, and the third for mounting the scar.
Alrighty. So, now that you have all your parts printed, it's time to start assembling it. Now I have an extra foregrip, scar, and stock here. The scar and stock should be available on the Buster Downloads page at some point. I won't promise when. And when it comes to printing parts, just make sure that you have 2 of the same O-ring collet. In my case, I'm using the 15mm with the carbon fiber barrel. If you order yours with the 16mm barrel, it will also be carbon fiber for the moment. But, yeah, let's get started. So, we're going to start with one of the smaller pieces of assembly, which is just putting the screws into the catch here. For those of you who may have watched the slug video, this will be very reminiscent of that. We're going to take the 2 longest screws, the shorter of which will go in the front, and the longer of which will go in the back. In my case, they will just slide in nice and easily. I'm going to tighten this front one down just a little bit. Make sure it's all the way in. The screw head should be inside of that face. It shouldn't be poking out of it. And for the back, it should be basically flush with that face as well, but doesn't have to be exactly there. Next quick bit of assembly is just the plunger head. We have the main body of it, which prints with layer lines going lengthwise through it, and then the front of it, which prints with layer lines going perpendicular to the length of the plunger head and hole. And those should just slide together nicely. In my case, there's a bit of friction there. Yours might not have it. That is a-okay. There isn't really any situation, as long as this does not slide freely off of it, there isn't a situation where these need to be bonded together or anything. If you're worried about it, gluing it together should be fine, but I have not had any issues with anything like that. Next thing we're going to do is just take one of our large O-rings and just squeeze it around the top. And in my case, it's already covered in lube from being well used. So get some of that off of my fingers. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put together our grip here. This is one of the parts where I'd recommend adding some extra walls if you're really pushing the spring load, but in my case, more or less default settings works fine. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab the grip insert, flip it over, and put one nut in there. Yours should hold in my case it's loose, so I need to flip the grip over to slide it in. But that should just slide in, like so. And then we're going to take one of the second longest bevel-headed screw, I screw it in. When it comes to tools for the assembly, you should just need a M2.5 Allen key and a Phillips head screwdriver, or a flathead screwdriver. But in my case, I have a bunch of hex head screws for prototyping everything, so that's what I got. That one will just screw in as far as it'll go. Don't over-tighten it, or don't tighten it a huge amount, just enough that it's stuck in there, as over-tightening that could fracture some of that part. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to put in our trigger and the catch. These are going to use 2 of our shorter M3 bolts. So we're going to go for the trigger first. That'll go in the front here, with hole in the trigger, aligning inside of that one. And the bolt will just go in there. It's possible that yours will freely drop in there. That is a-okay. It'll be held in place by the 2 sidebars on the blaster. And if yours needs to get screwed in, that is fine as well. Obviously mine is, and this blaster has worked fine in the past. So I'll just screw that in, making sure that it's clearing our little channel down the side. So mainly the head of the bolt is not in there. And the trigger should rotate freely. I found that a little bit of elephant's foot on the trigger can make that a bit harder, so you might need to shave that down. And if you want to put lube in there, you can. I found it works just fine without it. Next, we're going to put the catch in. So, similar thing, in from the top, lining the two holes, and putting one of the short M3 bolts in there. And again, tightening it down or sliding it in, depending on your print tolerances. Another thing that elephant's foot can cause is these bolts actually tightening to the catch itself. So you can see if I loosen it, the catch will walk one way, and if I tighten it, the catch will walk more towards the other. So I'm just going to get that roughly centered. Doesn't need to be perfect, just something to be aware of. And now that should move freely. It's not going to rotate too far, but you can see how that's working there. Next thing we're going to do is the mag release. One thing for mag fitment, I found that you may need to shave a tiny bit off of the top of the mag release. Not much, not even a millimeter of material, but just a little bit to get mags to catch super easily. But with yours, you may not have to do that. So with this, we're going to take our spring, or small spring as opposed to main spring, and that is going to nest in the top there. With the grip more or less on its back, we're going to set the spring into, well, we're going to slide all that in like so. So the spring has a little nook that it will rest in, and the mag release should line up with the hole there for the last of our M3 bolts, of our short M3 bolts. This is a spot where, on mine, the print tolerance, or on the version that I'm working with, this hole was designed for a different length of M3 bolt, so I'm not sure I'll be able to tighten it down, but on yours it should tighten down just fine. And one thing here is that, depending on elephant's footing and all that, you may need to be cautious of not over-tightening that, as it can prevent the mag release from moving freely. But you can see it's nice and snappy at the moment, so we're all good there. One thing we'll need to come back and do is put an M3 nut in both these spots when we're putting all of the pieces together. But for the moment, that's as far as we're going to take the main grip section. So now we're going to move over to the front. Starting with adding the muzzle piece, which will go on like that. So we're going to grab two of our M3 nuts and two of the shortest bevel-headed screws. And the M3 nuts will just slide in from the side, and the screws will get tightened down through the holes in the front. Pretty simple and straightforward, but just like so. Just make them nice and snug. They don't have to be super tight. There's not a lot of force going through this part, but it's here so that you can have a pretty short barrel and not need to worry about orange muzzle or things like that. Or also, if you have a big wonking scar on there, like I do, then you could make this top rail a tertiary color if you're printing it yourself. But now that we have that on there, we're going to go ahead and grab our linear rail and start putting that in. One thing to note is it can be a good idea to put a little bit of lube in it. Mainly what that means is putting a bit in each of the valleys on each side, and then running the rail back and forth. As you can see, I've already done that. I just use some super lube. This makes the rail run a little bit smoother than it might otherwise. Depending on the rail, if you get the kit from Xshot Designs, then the rail might be packaged and will be lubed plenty enough as it comes, but you may need to add some or refresh it depending on how well the package is done in shipping. But now, You may think that you can just lay it on its back and it'll go right in, but we have a couple of notches here to keep the rail in a little bit vertically. So we're going to bring it in at an angle so that the carriage ends up in the middle. And then the end of the rail will then slide forward into the muzzle and front of this piece, like so. One thing to be wary of is letting the carriage slide off the end, as then you can lose all the little bearings. The rails that we ship will have little rubber stoppers in them. You'll need to take the front one out before you put it in, but you could leave the rear one in for most of the build, up until we attach this other piece here. But just a side note, to be wary that this is a free moving piece and it is liable to go flying off the end if you give it reason to. But now that we have it on there, you're going to grab our front rail, which is just the wicked flat one, one of our M3 nuts, and then one of the now second longest bevel-headed screws. So that M3 nut is going to go in the spot in the thread up there, and that should fall in pretty nicely. And I like to just use a finger to hold that in place. I'm going to flip this over, put the rail in, and as you can tell, forwards and backwards matters a fair amount here, but also it's pretty obvious. The pick rail pattern should continue, and also all of the holes should line up with those in the linear rail. But then you can just put the screw in the front there and tighten it down, like so. Now we're going to take two of our second shortest M3 screws and then our two heat set inserts for these other two holes. These heat set inserts will not be going into a part, but I may put out a free part for them if it becomes an issue in the future for the kind of install that we're about to do, because we're going to put the heat set insert in the hole in the rail behind the hole in the Picatinny rail. And I'll take one of the, so we're going to take two of our shortest screws to use for this, and put it in there, and tighten it down. The back of the screw may stick out a little bit from being flush with the top of the rail. That is a-okay, and is how they're expected to end up. Don't need to be flush, just not sticking out a lot. Tightening them all the way down should get you where they're supposed to be. Whoop. I'm just using my thumb on the back here to keep the heat set insert from rotating. You may also need, you may need to use something else for that, but I found it doesn't take a whole lot. And this, you can see it's running right over that one in the middle, and the one in the back it won't get to. But now that we have those installed, now we're going to do the pump block and start that assembly. So first things first is our 4 long M3 bolts. We're just going to go into each of the holes in the bottom of it. You can just press those in for now. If you need to tighten them down to get them going further, that is a-okay. But they'll be coming out the holes in the bottom and then going to our linear, into the carriage on the linear rail in a second here. But first we're going to grab 2 priming bars, which are their 2 short ones. And then we're going to grab 2 of our second shortest screws. And 2 M3 nuts. And then we're going to take the end where there's a bit more material and slide that into the priming block. You should see the hole line up through there. It might be possible to put it a little bit further forward than that hole, but you really want it just about lined up. Also, if you don't line it up perfectly, the screw should bring it in to be just fine. These systems can be a little bit off-kilter and work just fine. So we're just going to put that in there, tighten it down. And we're good on that side. Repeat for the other. Longer end into the block. Line it up. In the middle of the block, there's a little notch for the M3 nut to go in there. So I just slide that in and hold it in with my pointer finger, and then tighten the screw from the outside. Just like so. Now those are all nice and in there. There might be a slight bit of wiggle to them. That's normal. Also, if you're having trouble putting them in, make sure to clean up any elephant's footing that might be closing up the bottom of, or the gaps in the priming block for the bars. Okay, so now that we have those together, we're going to quickly put the O-ring collets together. There's going to use the small O-rings, which can just go in from the end. And you just press those in there, wiggle them around until they lay in the nice, a nice little space for them. Might take a little bit of doing. You may need to do that with screwdrivers or whatever. Just try not to put too many notches or anything in the ring, as that can lead to them breaking. So now we're going to screw the one collet into the front there. And then we're going to grab the magwell top, and we're going to screw the other one in there. These should move in freely. If you find you need to use pliers to force them a little bit the first time, that's can be normal depending on your tolerances, but they should screw in on their own without too much force. So now we have this set up. Well, now we're going to go back to the priming block. I'm just going to use Allen key to push these all the way through to the extent that I can. This just makes it a little bit easier to line up the priming block with the carriage on the linear rail, as opposed to doing it blindly. You'd also have the ridges at each end of the priming block, which will center it pretty well on there. Now we're going to take that, just press it on there, and about right. And I like to tighten them, kind of go around tightening them down. And you're just going to want to tighten them down until the threading stops. This being metal to metal threads, it's pretty sturdy. That one's bottomed out. And so is that one. And one more. And there we go. That should still move freely and not wiggle at all. Now we're going to slide this on. Again, there's some little notches to go into the linear rail, so we'll need to slide it on from the end, but it should just slide on smoothly. You may need to pause to get the priming bars to go through it, but just adjust those like so. Now you have these little parts, which will align the front shroud with magwell top, and those should just nest together pretty smoothly. And make sure it's moving fairly smoothly. It will smooth out over time if there's anything rubbing, but also if you have a lot of plastic on plastic rubbing, then you might want to take this back out and sand it down a little bit. Mainly the angled faces at the top here to get it to move a little bit more smoothly. And if you find it's catching more at the end of more about when you get to like there or so, then you might need to clean up a little bit of elephant's foot on the bottom sides there. And that should move pretty smoothly. Next thing we're going to do is put on the back section of rail, grabbing another of our M3 nuts, one of our longer remaining screws. And this will go on just like that. Pretty straightforward. And M3 up in the bottom there. Making sure to get it to be flat, like so. And that down. Put that in there. It'll go through a hole in the linear rail. And you can just go ahead and tighten that down. Like so. And it's nice and on there. And you have a musical instrument. Okay, so one last thing before you start bringing all the pieces together is grabbing the pusher. And this is going to get one of our O-rings going around it at the base. This part is printed out of TPU. If you aren't comfortable printing TPU, then you can get them with your hardware kit, or you can print them yourself if you'd like to. But we're going to grab 2 of the M3 nuts and our last 2 of our shortest screw. The M3 nuts are going to go into the bottom of the pusher. They should have nice little spaces. On yours, they'll probably hold in a bit better than they do on mine, just because this is an older file, but still work just fine. I'm going to take our screws and screw them in from the outsides. These ones you just want to make snug, as it's mostly tightening down on TPU, so tightening it all the way is going to stretch some stuff and warp it a little bit. Just like so. And those should go in a little bit from the surface on the outside, and that should slide forward to nest nice and smoothly. Alright, now we get to start putting it all together. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take our grip, and we're going to put the one M3 nut on each side at the front here. In the newer version of the files, these will hold in on their own. In mine, they're a little bit loose and can be a little bit hard to work with because of that. But this will just, whoop. Speaking of being hard to work with, there we go. But these two should just slide together nice and easily. And the front of the grip block will line up with the face on the inside there. And you have it situated right. So then we can lay that down. We're going to put in one of our sidebars. The 2 holes will be going to the back of the blaster, while the part without any will go to the front. And that should slide pretty freely all the way in, like so. Making sure to line up the hole in the middle there. That should be centered. You can use just a screwdriver or something to wiggle it to get it exactly right, but close enough is, well, close enough. I'll take the other side and do the same thing. And if you find you're having trouble with this, if you have, depending on where the seam on your parts has ended up, like if it's at the back or front here, or at the front of one of these sides, that can make it a bit more difficult. And also, if you're putting a lot of force into it, then you want to make sure that these are actually lined up at the front, as they can be very close without quite being lined up. But now we got both of those in. We're gonna take our screwdriver, line them up nice and pretty like. Take some of our shorter remaining screws and put those in. can take a little bit to find the nuts in there, but when they do, tighten in nice and easily, and should go a little bit past flush with the outer surface there. Again, lining up the hole, and then going for it. But now that's all in there, and we can move to the back part of the blaster. So for this, we're going to start with plunger tube and plunger head. Plunger head, you really put in from either end because it'll move pretty smoothly. But generally, you want to put lube in the tube and then slide the plunger head in. And then we'll slide all that in from the back here, making sure the flat face of the plunger head is going forward. And that should slide on nice and smoothly, like so. And the end of that should end up. You want to make sure the end of that is far enough in for the catch to still move freely. If it isn't, you can shave it down with sandpaper or anything like that. And that'll work just fine. But now we have the end cap to put on, which is going to take our last O-ring here. Just going to get some of the extra lube that's ended up on my mouth here. It's okay if it ends up with lube on it, just, you know, don't like getting it on the hands. Okay. So now this part, there's a little dovetail on the top rail here with a spot in there in the end piece. So we're going to try and line those up. And you don't want to send this part all the way on just yet, but you can get it a good way there. And you can get a little bit onto the carbon fiber bars, but not too much. Make sure to line that up. If it's taking a lot of force, that's probably because it's not lined up correctly. So you can see, started at the end of the carbon fiber bar is just in there. And then we're going to slide the O-ring in from one side. You'll probably need to squish yours a bit more to get it to go in there. And then we're going to slide it back a little bit more. Before we go all the way, you usually need to take a screwdriver or something like that and just work the O-ring around the outside of the bar of each bar, and then we'll slide in nice and easily. Got this almost lined up. Just getting this last bit of the O-ring up and over. It's okay if the O-ring gets a little bit beat up in this process. It's not getting put under much stress in a direction where it's going to break. And there we go. Now, we don't want to slide it quite all the way on there. Yeah, so I'm going to back that out a little bit, because we need to grab both levels of the O-ring. As you can see, currently we have the one that's way in there and the other that's part of the way. And we want to take a screwdriver or something to go under both those and pull them out the back like so. And then we can slide that all the way on, take the screwdriver out, and now that's all lined up. And the trigger should have a bit of force to it. It can be a rather stiff trigger at the start, but it'll wear in as you play with the blaster. So, next thing we're going to do is put this last screw in the top rail. So that's going to be second to longest remaining and one of our M3 nuts. You may need to loosen this front one to the front screw in this rail to line it up correctly, like I'm doing with mine, as these can end up not quite lining up because of the hardware or print tolerances close enough there. And the spot for it is just inside the end piece, and that should lay in there nice and easily. And I'm going to hold that in with my pointer finger, then put the screw in from the top, like so. This one you may need to angle the screw to start it, depending on how lined up or not the holes in the printed parts are. And just tighten that all the way down. And there we go. And I'll go a little bit past flush the valley and the rail there. And then if you loosen the front screw to put that in, then you can, at this point, tighten it back down to where it was. And that'll all be fine and dandy. So now we're going to grab our two side braces here. And I'll put the one in like so. These should lay in the blaster pretty nicely. A slightly tighter fit on them could be useful, but isn't too much of a problem. These are mostly here to keep the grip from twisting out of the bars, and they seem to do a pretty good job, regardless of infill or material and all that. So they'll end up sandwiching into the grip, and with the back piece, we're going to take our M3 bolt. It's going to go in from the one side. We're just going to start that. Goes fine. The nut space is a little bit loose, so we'll need to hold it in. Start that. So we have one last thing that needs hand. Put the nut in there. Cover it with our thumb, and then just tighten this down. Like so. And it should be the last 3 M3 nuts, but evidently one has wandered away. Now if at this point, if you're doing just the flat end cap as opposed to the buffer tube, after you do these two, it would just twist in, and you put the takedown pin in, and be all done. Well, put the takedown pin in, put the barrel in, and you'd be good. But we have the buffer tube here, so we're going to walk you through that as well. But first, for these last 2 screws, there are spots for the M3 nuts on the inside there. So we're going to put that in. And if it falls into the rest of the blaster, it's pretty easy to shake out. But it should lay in there nicely. I'll take one of our screws, put it in like so, and then just tighten that down. And do the same for the other side. And there you go. Now if you have the flat end cap, you can just take your barrel, put it in, and you put your spring in, twist the cap in, and be good to go. But we have the buffer tube, so we're going to assemble it, which is pretty straightforward, and it's not going to apply to some players, but for those who it does, it could be useful. Yeah, the spring post, and we have the buffer tube itself. The spring post is here to help with seagull springs or harrier springs. But to assemble it, just put one M3 nut in there. Make sure to get it to lay flush. That side is going to go opposite the screw. So M3 nut facing down, while the screw is facing up. It'll slide in nice and easily. It's probably worth laying down the front of it, making sure it's somewhat straight in there. And then M3 screw, and the last screw will just go in, and we'll tighten that all the way down. And the reason for these being separate parts is just that for printability it makes a whole lot more sense. And also when it comes to part strength, printing the buffer tube in an orientation where the spring post could easily be done just doesn't make sense. But tighten that all the way down, just like so. And it should be a little bit inset from the rounded face there. Then we can take our spring, slide it in, put the buffer tube in there, and twist it. And put our takedown pin in, like so. Slide our scar on there. A buffer tube. And a nice foregrip. And there you go. That's how you assemble a Helix. Now, if you find you're having issues with things like material skipping or things like that, I would mainly look at reprinting the catch in slightly larger size or things like that. They don't have a huge amount of area that they overlap, but it's enough for any spring load I've tested, and I've tested some pretty heavy ones. When it comes to the mag release, again, it should rotate nice and smoothly. If you're putting mags in and they aren't catching, as you would expect them to, then just take a little bit off the top there. Now, it doesn't need to be a lot, but just a small amount will make a big difference. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments or reach out. And if you're interested in joining more of the community, then join the Discord server when it's live.